Hello, this is Cho of the Shiny Colors Discord. Welcome to another episode of the Shiny Review. Today we've got two new cards to talk about, the new Produce SSR for Hana and Support SSR for Hiyori as part of Twilight's collection. This means these cards are technically limited. You will be able to pull for them in the future on later Twicolate banners, but if you want to spark them, now is your only real time to do so. So do keep that in mind if you are deciding to pull now rather than later. Starting things off, we have Hana. It hasn't really been that long since the last Cometic card, and certainly not that long since the last Hana card. Twicolate Hana is a pure visual unit with a focus on building up mulligans initially, letting you better set up appeals for easier link appeals. As you get more copies, she becomes a bit more of an all-rounder style support, with a bit of a gamble on the types of buffs she provides. Once maxed out, she accesses her live skill generation, granting her an insanely powerful set of AoE appeals to start sweeping up judges relentlessly. In a lot of ways, Twicolate Hana is not too dissimilar to Twicolate Haruki, just now with an orange coat of paint instead of blue. While the gimmick of her 1-star appeal is a little frustrating, you aren't exactly upset to get any of the effects per se, unless you get 2 times of the first buff, which is fairly underwhelming. She's functionally good as either a visual unit or as a center, and benefits from having a stronger memory appeal over Luca 4, making your decision much easier if you happen to have both cards. Her roles are center, probably, attack all, buffer, mulligans, and she has live skill generation. I moderately to highly recommend pulling for this Hana. Hana's initial appeal is a visual 3.5 that grants you 1 mulligan. This gives you +1 to the ability to swipe up on an appeal to draw a new one. This links into a visual 60% buff for 5 turns. Her 1-star appeal is a visual 5.0 that grants you 1 mulligan and 2 random effects of a visual 40% buff for 4 turns, a passive skill activation rate up of 10% for 3 turns, or a passive skill strength up of 15% for 3 turns. The plus appeal, which requires the full Cometic lineup and for it to be turn 3 or later, is an additional mulligan. The 4-star appeal is a visual 4.5 to all judges that grants 2 mulligans and also generates a new appeal in your deck, the triple plus appeal. This links into a visual 100% up for 5 turns. Said triple plus appeal is a visual 5.5 to all judges that raises your visual by 160% for 4 turns and duets randomly with Cometic. The plus appeal, which requires 3 or more Cometic in your skill history, is a visual 2.0. A lot of these effects will feel fairly familiar, and that primarily has to do with the fact that Twicolate Haruki feels like the clear blueprint for Hana. That said, Hana only having 1 generated appeal over 2 is interesting, especially given how distinct her appeals are once you get past the initial appeal. Having access to a lot of mulligans is going to help a fair bit, but they also haven't been printing too many change appeals lately, so this feels more like a consistency bump rather than an enabler for what was originally kinda their playstyle. As for her passives, Hana's 1-star passive is a visual 60% up if it's turn 2 or earlier. This has a 30% chance to activate once, and comes with a visual plus 150 uncap. Her 2-star passive is a visual 130% up if you're running the full Cometic lineup, and it has a 30% chance to activate once, and comes with an all stats plus 100 uncap. Her 3-star passive is a visual 160% up if you have activated a live skill generation effect. That does not mean that you've used the live skill generated appeal, but rather used an appeal that has made one. So this doesn't necessarily mean that Hana has to do that. Anybody that can make an appeal will proc this passive. It has a 30% chance to activate twice, and comes with a mental plus 200 uncap. Her Rainbow passive unlocks at 4 stars, alongside a Vocal Dance visual plus 100 uncap. Her Memory appeal, when maxed out, is a visual 2.5 that links into a visual 3.0. Her total uncaps are Vocal Dance and Mental plus 200, Visual plus 500. Said Rainbow passive is a visual 220% up that requires the full Cometic lineup and for it to be turn 4 or later. It has a 30% chance to activate twice and is limited to once per turn. Her Twicolate passive is all members' memory gauge gain plus 10%. The Twicolate passive continues to be a real good one, so even just having a single copy of Hana is good enough for many players, even if you don't intend on running Cometic in any capacity. For now, this is less effective on Cometic purely on the merit of not having access to a charge appeal. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if they release, say, a PC Luca or Haruki sometime in the future who happens to be visual, making her an obvious slot in for the team. Now, crackpot theories aside, this, along with the rest of her kit, makes her a very solid addition to your lineup of Cometic, and of course, as Twicolate. Now, Twicolate has not gotten any less expensive, so you may only have this Hana at 0 or 1 stars. Her role changes drastically depending on the number of copies you pull for her. 1 star gives her the semi-random utility buffs that can help facilitate the other members of your team, and you won't really see a drastic shift in her playstyle until 4 stars. The passives we already went over, and they're relatively easy to use. Her memory appeal is still something that is very much playable, even if it's a little bit bare bones. Her Twicolate passive also gives her that additional role when building know-how and step, to pass the effect on to the rest of your team if you decide it's something that you need. For the support recommendations, the MVP of course is Twicolate Luca, but we also have cards featuring mostly Visual Antica, alongside some maybe niche picks like Hana. It should really go without saying that the best support for Visual Comedic is Visual Comedic. Junkstar Luca has easy-to-access masteries for Hana, solid passives, and can serve as a useful appeal on your other cards to establish Luca's 4-star passive. Beyond this, Visual Antica serve as a very convenient shell, with also the freedom to flex between a proper Visual Kogane or Twicolate Kogane for her handy set of masteries. Finally, I chose to include Amana in here to round out the page, but it also works well in conjunction with a Produce Mamimi should you choose to bring one. Since remember, one of her easier passives involves either running Amana, Hinana, or Mamimi on the team. For some synergy suggestions, of course we have to start with Luca 4. She acts as the backbone for Visual Comedic, providing access to a handful of powerful and efficient AoE visual appeals. Her stronger passives play exactly into the stronger Hana passives for a very strong turn 4 offense once it's enabled. Haruki's initial SSR, which may have been for free depending on when you started playing, is at its core a basic visual unit that can provide a tiny bit of defense with interest lock and okay enough passives to float in this team. She's absolutely replaceable, but is a bit necessary for now if you're specifically trying to run Visual Comedic, as she is the only Haruki with any semblance of visual in her kit so far. Finally, Mai Kole Yuika carries a couple defensive appeals for visual and relatively easy to use passives on a team like Comedic. Her 4-star appeal also happens to have a 25% memory gauge boost to use on it as well, making her a pretty useful unit to set up a memory appeal if you feel like you're behind. Now for the grades. Hana as a center, I will give the same as Haruki, an A. A general 5.0 memory appeal is playable, but nothing that screams to the heavens that it's something insane. You can theoretically offset this by utilizing her generated appeal to get a massive buff to her visual stat, but even then, the base multipliers won't be taking a huge amount of advantage from that. Still very good though. Haruki is very popular for Dance Comedic, so I would not be surprised if Hana rises up the ranks as they get more support. As a unit, I think she's also very solid. S+ to SS-. Very, very effective. Hana is almost the visual parallel to Haruki, just without the additional generated appeal and a slight adjustment to passive strength. She has a lot of built-in utility thanks to her initial and 1-star appeals, and dials up the effectiveness once you can access her final appeal. Her passives aren't particularly picky, making her a real easy-to-use unit in a team that is rapidly picking up traction. If you are somebody that is invested in the future, this is a card certainly worth picking up. Next then, we have Hiyori. Twicolate Hiyori rounds out our collection of Illumine cards for the set technically. We have a Produce card for Mono and Meguru, and now a Twicolate support for Hiyori. She's a pure dance support with a lot of the expected masteries, including SP, Mental, Dance Uncap, some Room Mastery, and Stamina Mastery for the Dance Room. Passive-wise, she's built to fully delve into passive activation rate up, meaning a lot of her skills have low proc chances to compensate. She has some pretty egregious lows, but some high highs if everything works out in her favor. Her support skills include Unit Mastery SP reaching +12 at level 65, Unit Mastery Mental reaching +9 at level 80, Unit Mastery Dance Limit Up reaching +8 at level 80, Dance Mastery Stamina reaching +6 at level 80, and Room Mastery reaching +5 at level 80. Her support appeal does scale, starting at a Dance 3.0, becoming a 3.1 with a 5% dance buff at 3 turns at level 60, upgrading all the way to a Dance 3.5 with a 25% dance up for 3 turns by level 80. Her TFD idea is Dance, her Insight token for Grad is Visual, and her proficiency and landing point is in Mental. Hiyori's initial passive is a Dance 60% up that requires it to be turn 3 or earlier and has a 20% chance to activate twice. Her 1-star appeal is a Dance 3.5 that raises your passive skill activation rate by 5% for 3 turns. Her 2-star passive is a Dance 140% up that requires Hiyori on your team and has a 5% chance to activate twice. Her 3-star appeal is a Dance 3.5 that raises your passive skill activation rate by 20% for 3 turns. And at 4 stars, her Rainbow passive is a dance 220% up that requires Hiyori in your skill history and has a 5% chance to activate once and is limited to once per turn. Her total uncaps are a plus 150 to mental and 300 to dance when maxed out. Hiyori, I'm gonna give a B to a B+. I hate how they do this to Illuminate every time. I really do. You take a perfectly good card that has enough restrictions to be tame enough, only to slap on some of the worst activation odds on passives to promote stacking as much activation rate buffs as possible. All this ends up doing is making the card wildly inconsistent and more frustrating to use than anything else. There is a world where your build constantly raises activation rates to make Hiyori come off as passable, but it's a lot of intended effort for a payoff that most other cards do way easier. While I wouldn't say this card is super awful, it's gonna feel very frustrating if you are not constantly stacking up those buffs. Let me be clear. A lot of cards have buffs that are very similar to Hiyori with 20 to 30% odds, so dropping hers all the way down to 5% for similar or possibly the same strength feels a little annoying. So that's why she gets the B to B+. That will do it for the video today. Thank you so much, as always, for watching. Next time we'll be talking about whatever banner comes next, so let's look forward to it together. Till then, I've been Cho. Have a wonderful rest of your day.